This tropical disturbance is now likely to develop into a tropical storm or even a hurricane. Your forecast across the Caribbean and the Bahamas starts right now.
This is Meteo Mundo.
Hi everyone, Rusty back here at Meteo Mundo. Nice to see you on a Thursday. I hope you're doing well. We're going to get right into this video, all the latest information on now Invest 97L. We do have an Invest. We're going to get all into all the newest model data, the potential tracks, the impacts I expect here. You know, I love to hear from you guys. Let me know in the comment section below where you're viewing from. You have a specific question about the forecast, you can drop it down there as well. We're going to get right into it, friends. The Invest 97L is located right over Hispaniola on this Thursday afternoon. It's still a disorganized area of showers and storms, but it is producing some very heavy rain and flooding rains right now for portions of the Turks and the Caicos, Haiti, the Dominican Republic, back east towards Puerto Rico, the U.S. and British Virgin Islands, and even some heavier rain through portions of the Leeward Islands on this Thursday. So that's the first story of this disturbance. At the hour, we have some significant rainfall through some of these areas. Look, some of this is very beneficial rain, and a lot of you have mentioned that, but we're also getting too much rain in too short of amount of time in some areas. As of note, up in the northwest sides of Puerto Rico, we've actually had some flash flood warnings and some special weather statements there. You can see the heavy rain and storms being produced out of those areas right now. I'll throw on those special weather statements and flash flood warnings for places like Aguadilla, Isabela, towards San Sebastian. Again, heavy rainfall far northwest sides of Puerto Rico. Just some good hefty storms with this. And again, this extends back towards the west, where we've had very heavy rain across the Dominican Republic today, Santo Domingo, Haiti, Port-au-Prince, over towards Lacaille. 2 to 4 inches, that's 50 to 100 millimeters, but locally higher amounts. This could lead to isolated flash flooding, river rises, landslides, mudslides are a possibility. This, of course, is going to track off towards the west, so some of this will begin to enter eastern Cuba as we get later on this Thursday, and they're already seeing some localized showers and storms. So again, right now, this is a very heavy rainmaker for this area. Let's look at the visible satellite presentation, because there's a couple of things that I want to talk about over the next 24 hours. First of all, again, it's still an elongated area, okay? But we are starting to see a consolidation of some of the storms and winds just north of Hispaniola. The next 24 hours is going to be vital as to how this is going to develop as it pushes towards the Strait of Florida. Because if it stays elongated and we still have at least a mid-level circulation south of the island, more than likely that's going to pull the low-level center right over Cuba, and that would slow down development. One thing that has kind of hindered the development is obviously its interaction with land. It's going over a very mountainous island right now in Hispaniola. Now again, producing flooding rains in this, but not really able to wrap up organizationally. If it stays over the eastern side of Cuba, that again, interacting with a very high terrain landmass, is going to limit the potential development on our Friday. But if it can consolidate a stronger area of lower pressure north of the island, then we could see this begin to ramp up a little bit more as it heads towards the central and the northwest Bahamas, but eventually farther west and into the Strait of Florida. So again, you see the red area now. It's now a 70% chance of development, and a lot of the models are agreeing that as we go down the road into the weekend, we are going to get a tropical system to develop out of this as it moves into the southeast Gulf of Mexico. But again, at the hour, it's about the gusty winds and the very heavy rainfall and the lightning that it's bringing to our areas. As I mentioned, Turks and Caicos into the southeast Bahamas, eastern Cuba. We're going to see some rain over Jamaica as well, but more concentrated over Haiti, the Dominican Republic, and even on the back end of this, portions of Puerto Rico and the U.S. and British Virgin Islands. Now down the road, we're going to have to watch out for this system as it moves into the eastern Gulf of Mexico and the potential for some very heavy rain as it could be slowing up as we get deep into the weekend and early next week. That's what's happening right now. Let's get into the latest models for you guys. We'll start off with the European model. Again, the European model over the last 24 hours has trended back to the other models, including the GFS and the ICON, in developing a system in the Gulf of Mexico. Now, It is one of the models that keeps it very elongated over Hispaniola and Cuba, so it doesn't develop it until it gets deep into the northeast Gulf of Mexico. The European model then pulls it east across the state. So we'll watch it again. Notice that there's no development because it stays very elongated with the mid-level circulation all the way down here. Eventually, as we get into late Sunday, Monday, it tries to wrap up a little bit, pulls it over the north central portions of Florida, and then back out into the Atlantic, where we actually have a deepening area of low pressure. That's the deterministic model here of the European. When we look at the ensemble members, you're going to see slower development as well in general, right? Most of them, again, keep the mid-level and low-level centers over the next 48 hours separated so it doesn't get stronger until it gets into the northeast Gulf. And then most of the European models pull it to the north and to the east. And we're going to talk about how the models differ in what happens as this system moves up the west coast of Florida, because some of them slow it down, some of it make it very strong, some of them accelerate it in different directions, but there's not a lot of consensus of the models as it gets into this part of the Gulf of Mexico. In general, with the European model, again, developing systems, pulling it up the United States East Coast, but in a very slow fashion. The GFS model, and we'll let this run towards the end and then we'll talk about it at the beginning. The GFS model consolidates this invest faster. Okay, so we're going to get a quicker area of low pressure moving up the west coast of Florida as we go through our weekend. Now, on the deterministic model, it follows about the same plot as the European, pulls it over the state, and then actually deepens it into a much stronger storm, potentially even a hurricane, as it gets off both the South and the North Carolina coastlines. Again, this is the deterministic model from the GFS. We can see the storm developing up the west coast and then moving up to the north and to the east, but still very slowly. This gets into our Tuesday and then eventually really slows down into Wednesday. But again, very, very warm ocean waters, very, very little wind shear. On the ensemble members here, you're not going to see a ton of them, but they are going to be a little bit more tightly clustered into the northeast Gulf of Mexico. And eventually, again, some of them pulling up to the north and to the east, others stalling out along the west coast of Florida, and some of them even moving back north and west. Even a couple that do a little bit of a curlicue spin. And we're going to talk about the fact that the steering currents as we get into early next week may end up becoming very non-existent, and this storm could come to a crawl in the northeast Gulf of Mexico or even the western side of the Atlantic. So that's what the European and the GFS ensembles and the deterministics look like. This is the ICON member model, which is running basically in congruence with what I would say is the GFS. It's a slightly weaker system, keeping it as either a tropical depression, but more than likely a weak tropical storm. We'd get Debbie out of this. But all of the models in general are trending to be a little bit stronger right now, especially if the center of circulation can stay offshore rather than moving inland over the northern or the eastern panhandles of Florida. So again, ICON does take it back north and to the east, but there are others that don't simply quite do that. So let's talk about this steering current for us here. I'm going to take myself off screen. I'm going to bring on the telestration. Here's what it looks like. Oh, excuse me, can't do that. So let me bring myself back on camera. Here's what this looks like. There's a big ridge of high pressure in the western portion of the United States on Monday that extends itself through the Midwest. There's also an area of high pressure that's developing over the Bahamas, and that's kind of on the western side of our Bermuda High. We'll actually have a bit of a northeast wind here, and that's where this is going to try and slip in. But because of the northeast wind in the northeast Gulf of Mexico at this time, this might really slow down what could become Debbie. Okay, and now if that happens, you're looking at a potentially big time rainmaker for portions of Florida or the southeast United States in general, because again, the models can spin this around, curlicue it, drift it off towards the west, drift it off towards the east, or not even really move it over a few days. We're talking about maybe Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, not a lot of forward speed here until that area of high pressure relaxes and allows it to pull back up towards the east. But the bottom line is, and by the way, the yellow that you see is where Debbie would be here on this model, but there's very little steering current in a lot of the models as we get into early next week. Now, of course, we do have our tropical models running on this because we have an invest. So I'm going to pull those up for you right now. So those are the lines that you see here. Now, again, most of them, and now I'm telestrating. So let me get rid of that real quick. So let me just clear that off real quick, guys. So again, most of them pull it right over Cuba, okay? That doesn't necessarily mean that the center is going to be over Cuba, but again, it's a very elongated area and really isn't expected to wrap up until it gets north of Cuba and just west of Key West anyway. But does the low-level center interact with land more over Cuba, or does it stay along the northern coast? And that's going to, again, play a big factor in how quickly this could develop. The GFS has it farther north. The European model has it a little bit farther off towards the south. But you can see the splits in the models here as we go into late weekend, early in the week. Some of them pull it east right across the state. Others bring it up and then slow it down. If you notice, I know the line's a little bit harder to see here, but there's very little movement with some of these as it gets towards the Panhandle, and a few of the members try and take it a little bit farther off towards the west. Bottom line is, after about late Saturday, early Sunday, as it gets into the Northeast Gulf, there's not a lot of consensus with the models and what it's expected to do. At least now, the GFS, the European model, the Icon are all kind of trending towards this track up the west coast of Florida over the weekend. We can look at the GFS model, and we'll do that right now. So we're going to first start off with the reflectivity. I'm going to go ahead and drop that red area again, just a little bit easier to see. So on the GFS, here's how this is going to play out. We'll see this staying very sloppy, but very heavy rain. Again, for Cuba, Jamaica, the Cayman Islands, Turks and Caicos, portions of the central southeast Bahamas, and eventually maybe even into the northwest Bahamas as well. So I'm just going to stair step this up, and you can see it coming through. Now, as we get into Saturday and this area moves off of the western area of Cuba, this is when we could start to see this trying to wrap up a little bit more. So as we get into Sunday and eventually into Monday. Now, on the deterministic of the GFS, it is still relatively progressive, meaning that some of the ensemble members slow this down near the Big Bend area of Florida, Apalachicola Bay, towards Cedar Key, but the deterministic does have enough forward speed to push it into the western Atlantic, where again, it wraps up into a stronger storm there. So again, we'll let this loop up one more time. And notice that there's going to be a lot of areas we have to watch out for. Heavy rain here, potentially tropical storm conditions for the western area of Florida, and then maybe even hurricane conditions as it moves up the eastern seaboard of the United States. Now, the intensity is obviously something that can't be determined right now. The models are all over the place with how strong this wants to make it. Some of them do make this a higher end tropical storm or a hurricane, but until we really get a deeper area of low pressure, and we're starting to run our tropical models right now, but until we get a little bit more consensus with those, we're not going to really have a great idea as far as intensity. But it's trending upward, if nothing else. Let's go back over to the winds. We're going to look at the wind vectors here out of the GFS model as well. Going to loop those up for you. Take again off of that area. And again, with this vector field, I'm going to make these a little bit bigger so they're just a little bit easier to see. So again, this is just going to allow us to see how the winds are going to play out here. Obviously, we know that the sea conditions are going to be kicked up. Hopefully, we're not going to have to deal with the storm surge here along the eastern side of the Gulf of Mexico. And again, you can see that spin and then pulling up to the north and to the east. So let's take a look at the intensity here. First of all, again, notice even on the GFS, right? It's going to struggle to wrap up over Cuba. Just makes sense, the land interaction. Now it starts to deepen as it gets into the bathwaters of the southeast Gulf of Mexico. So it's going to be some pretty nasty weather for places like Key West and Island Murata and Key Largo and the Keys. Are they going to see tropical storm conditions? More than likely not. But the GFS begins to wrap this up into a potential tropical storm as it moves up towards the Tampa area. And you can see those winds. And if I put on these numbers right here, you can actually see, actually, let me go here to throw on those. I'll eventually get it right. You can start to see that we're picking up some winds here in the 40-mile-an-hour range, okay? So this would be when we would get a tropical storm on the GFS model. And that tighter spin goes right up the west coast towards the Cedar Key area, all right? Then we'll follow this as it moves along, pushes over the state, and then as it gets up the west coast, the east coast of the United States here, you can start to see the intensity picks up even more, where now we're getting some 60-mile-an-hour winds at the surface. So this is where we would start to see the potential ramp up on the GFS into a hurricane. Now, hopefully, if nothing else, it moves offshore. But you can start to see those numbers are getting really close to hurricane strength here as we get into mid next week. So that's what we're going to have to be monitoring if the GFS plays out the way that it shows. I'm going to let this loop one more time for you guys so you can see it. Again, we'll watch the system potentially develop here in the southwest side of Florida, moving right up the coastline, and then eventually up towards the north and to the east. As far as wind gusts go, so this is not going to be sustained winds, but these are going to be gusts. Let's take a look at those. Again, we have plenty of time here to look at all the different information for you guys. So we're going to look at the winds in gusts. And so for my friends in Florida and the Bahamas, these would be of interest to you. So again, on the GFS, fresh winds coming into places like Nassau and Abaco, maybe up towards Grand Bahama and Bimini, going to kick up the surf and sea conditions this weekend, but it's really going to get stronger right up the west coast of Florida. And you can see that wrap up there. Some of those wind totals, let me bring that right back here. Let's just bring this right here. Some of those winds, again, in gusts, would be higher end tropical storm, okay? So again, that's the intensity on the GFS, not a hurricane in the Gulf in the deterministic, but a stronger tropical storm, and then ramping back up, right? And even stronger right here, where we would have some Cat 1 gusts off the coastline of North Carolina. We'll see. There is a plausible scenario where this really slows down in the northeast Gulf of Mexico and sits over portions of Florida for days, and the flood threat would be elevated. Let's hope, if nothing else, it's progressive, and then let's hope if it gets off the east coast of the United States, it pulls far enough away from the Carolina coastline where we don't have direct impacts. But that's way down the road, especially considering that this storm could be very slow early to mid next week. Let's look at the rainfall totals on the European model. We're going to see some high rainfall totals in Cuba, in Hispaniola, in the Turks and the Caicos, Jamaica, Cayman Islands, and then Florida and the Bahamas. We're talking about 4, 5, 6 inches of rain in some areas with locally higher amounts. Zooming in a little bit more, the European model again is progressive enough, right? Where we have widespread 4+ inches of rain along the west coast, but at least it's not worse. It's even higher up here as it gets off of the coastline. For the Bahamas, 3, 4, 5 inches of rain, Grand Bahama, Abaco, Bimini, Andros, New Providence, Eleuthera, even portions of the central side of the Bahamas as well. So flash flooding is absolutely a possibility with this system. Waves are going to be another concern as well. Obviously, boaters need to be very cautious of this through the Straits of Florida, all of the Bahamas, west coast of Florida. I'll keep you updated, but obviously check in with your local officials, your local messaging. Obviously, these conditions are going to change very, very quickly, but we would expect some very rough conditions across the western side of Florida, portions of the Bahamas, and then obviously next week up the United States East Coast, again, based on the GFS model. So let's break this down, friends, of what we know right now about Invest 97L. It's going to be a heavy rain and flood threat for the Dominican Republic, Haiti, and the Turks and the Caicos right now. Down the road, Cuba, the Bahamas, and Florida. Easily 2 to 4 inches of rain, that's 50 to 100 millimeters, but locally higher. I think at least up to 6 inches or 150 millimeters in a lot of spots. And the speed of Invest 97L / more than likely Debbie down the road will really determine how much rainfall we get in these areas, okay? Landslides, mudslides, some of the higher elevation islands, absolutely possible. Potential tropical storm conditions over Florida for the weekend ahead as well. You guys know I'm going to keep you updated on that. Friends, if you wouldn't mind doing me a big favor, if you're getting anything out of this video, thank you for liking this video. Thank you for subscribing here at Meteo Mundo. If you want these tropical updates, if you want your daily forecasts across the Caribbean and the Bahamas, obviously, if it's necessary, just like I did with Beryl, I'll be going live. So keep an eye out for that, for some live streams to go along with what's happening with this invest. Thank you for sharing this with your family and friends. And thank you for finding ways to support me here at Meteo Mundo via our memberships or super thanks, the PayPal, the Venmo that's in the description. So again, this is what's going on at the hour. Now, obviously, we have some other things to talk about here as far as showers and storms and the potential for rainfall. So right now, we're going to get into the island by island rainfall forecast. So I'm going to drop over here. I'm going to loop this back up. I'm going to bring back on our model. And we're going to talk about the rest of the area. Now, for places like Jamaica and the Cayman Islands, I don't expect quote unquote direct impacts except for maybe a brief time in the Cayman Islands with this system, but that does not mean you're not going to get some good beneficial rain and potentially a little bit too much as well. I'm going to drop the model time just a little bit here, so give me 1 second. We don't need to go as far out as I was going because I want to talk about again the impacts with this, but Kingston and Negrilla, Montego Bay and Grand Cayman over the next 48 hours, good rainfall opportunities there. Cuba is going to stay wet with some very heavy rainfall likely there. We've already mentioned that. The Bahamas, obviously, look, I don't think you're going to get the direct wind impacts, but we are going to be pulling in south winds, and that should provide solid rain totals, which I just showed you on the European model. We'll look at the GFS model coming up as well here, of 3 to maybe 6 inches of rain. And especially if this stalls out, places like Grand Bahama being close enough to the system, to Debbie, even along the east coast of Florida, where we would get some higher rainfall totals. It's actually going to be slightly drier for Central America in general, but scattered showers will continue to develop. Heaviest rain will still be down in Costa Rica and Panama. We will begin to dry out starting tomorrow for Hispaniola. Same thing for Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands. And then scattered rain is likely here across portions of the Lesser Antilles in general. Nothing significant, okay? And yes, down the road, there will be other tropical waves to have to watch out for. We'll get into those as necessary, okay? Speaking of the rainfall totals on the GFS, so this is the GFS model. We looked at the European model already. Again, it's easy to tell the GFS track. Heaviest rain is always going to be on the eastern side of a storm moving north. That puts the west coast of Florida all the way down to the southwest side in danger for some extremely heavy rainfall and some potential flooding, okay? So let's take a look at some of those numbers. You're going to see a lot of 4, 5, 6, 7 inches of rain here, guys. So widespread, excessive heavy rain, Florida, even up towards north central, Gainesville and Lake City. Again, 7, 8 inches of rain inland. Then it pulls over towards Brunswick, Georgia, and still some very heavy rainfall there. And then up the east coast, and this just goes out 5 days, but you know this would extend into portions of North Carolina as well. But Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, widespread 4 to 6, certainly locally higher. You can see on the GFS, we don't have as much rain as the European, but still some fairly impressive rainfall totals possible for the extreme northwest Bahamas. It is lighter on the GFS for places like Andros and Nassau and especially Eleuthera. It's just how sharp of an eastern edge are we going to end up getting, right? Sloppier system or a slower system would bring more heavy rain to the Bahamas in general. You can see some of the heavier rain over Cuba. There's your 4 inches plus or 100 millimeters in some spots. As I've mentioned, Jamaica could really use some of this rain. Now again, my friends in Jamaica, watch out for some potential flash flooding. It could come along for the ride, but we're also going to try and give you some rain to cool things down and help things out as well. Grand Cayman, Little Cayman, Cayman Brac. Again, I think it's underdoing it a bit, but you get the idea. There's your very solid 4 to 6 inches of rain in portions of Hispaniola, including the Dominican Republic and, of course, Haiti. And again, there's your potentially higher rainfall totals through portions of Puerto Rico. Everyone else will see something, but those are the big areas of concern. Let's break down the rain chance in these areas. And again, the areas in yellow for the days that I've highlighted are the more direct impacts from Invest 97L. So the Northwest Bahamas, right now I don't expect a direct impact, but obviously there's going to be impacts. And we'll keep an eye out for that. Obviously, boating conditions are going to be crappy this weekend, all right? I'd be planning to maybe stay in port, especially not getting out into the exposed waters of the Atlantic. Central and Southeast Bahamas, 80% chance tomorrow. Turks and Caicos rain chances fall. Cuba's rain chances exceptionally high there. Cayman Islands, again, could get brushed with kind of the southern edge of it. 60% chance tomorrow, 60% chance on Saturday. Places like Belize City, Cancun, and Cozumel, more scattered to isolated storms. Jamaica's rain chances, again, relatively high for us here over the next couple of days, 40% chance on Sunday. The Dominican Republic's rain chances stay okay. Same thing for Puerto Rico. Still some tropical moisture in play, but obviously not the widespread heavier rain that we've seen. U.S. and British Virgin Islands rain chances begin to fall a bit. It's still relatively dry in Bermuda. Anguilla's chances go from 40% down to 20 on Sunday. Same thing for our friends in St. Kitts and Nevis. Same thing like Saba, Martin, St. Eustatius as well. As a matter of fact, for these areas, Antigua, Barbuda, Montserrat, Guadeloupe, Dominica, Martinique, St. Lucia, St. Vincent, and the Grenadines, it's around a 40% chance tomorrow, and then just falling through the weekend with isolated showers. Still could see some heavier downpours, but a fairly dry forecast. Barbados, Grenada, Trinidad and Tobago, Suriname, Guyana, Nueva Esparta, and the ABC Islands as well. Not a lot of rain in general. Sure, there could be some, pockets of heavier rain, but that's not where we're going to have the emphasis for some of the heavier rainfall that I expect. Friends, you can follow me across all of social media, Instagram, TikTok, where we do some exclusive content there. Thank you for finding us on TikTok, X, Facebook. You want to send me a picture or video, it is myMediaMundo@gmail.com. Again, thank you so much for liking the video. Thank you for subscribing. Obviously, I'm going to keep you guys updated with the latest on Invest 97L, so check back in frequently here at Media Mundo for those updates. You have a great rest of your Thursday, and I will see you soon right here at Media Mundo.